Hi everyone and welcome to Triple M Adventures with Bill. This is series 2 of the Jumper T16 menus and we're going to go through the model setup screens, and the first page we're going to have a look at is the model setup page. Let's switch over to my Jumper T16. Okay, let's have a look at our radio. If we click our model button, okay, let's start having a look. So in the model name, obviously we can put the name of our model, and mine is the Taycan. Then we can put a picture of our model there. Now I've got a link in the description below to show you how to, and the parameters to set up your images so that you can display them on your Jumper T16. Okay, then we got the timers. We're able to set up 3 timers. Again, I have a video in the description below to help you set up your timers. So we'll go past the timers. There are 3 of those. Okay, now the extended limits, this option allows you to extend the servo travel limits in the outputs window. You can go up to 150. Without this option checked, the servo travel will normally go to 100. This option, extended trims, will allow trims to cover the full stick range instead of around plus minus 25%. You must be careful when using this option. I would suggest you do not. The reset option will reset all trims for all flight modes, and that is this one here. Display trims. Now this one is interesting. If you select no, you will not see the trim values on your model opening screen. Selecting yes will display a value next to your virtual trim tabs on your screen. Select change and it will display the value for a few seconds and then disappears from the screen. So let me show you this in operation. We are going to change over to the cheetah model. So I'm going to push enter and then push the scroll button, model select, and I want to go up to fixed wings and I'm going to change to the cheetah. And select. We are going to go into the model setup and go down to display trims. So if we click this, we have the option no, change, or yes. So we are going to choose yes. Okay. Now if we exit and go to our model screen, opening screen, you can see there's a trim value there. It's showing the trim value that I've adjusted this model to fly. So I'm sure you can see it on the screen. It's this tiny little figure here. So that's what the display trims. Now what can happen, you can have that, you'll adjust the trim and it'll make the did noise and then show a figure and then it will disappear, or basically it can just stay there. So when you look at the screen, you can see the amount of adjustment has been applied to that control surface. Let me show you the trim steps in action on the radio. The trim step option allows you to adjust the trim action, so for a given length of time held, the control surface will adjust more or less. The default is fine, and I will personally leave mine at that default setting, but let me show you this in action. Okay, so if we click fine, and then we're going to go, we've got all sorts of options. We've got medium, coarse. So let's go for coarse. Okay, and if we go back now. Okay, so if I hold the trim button of my aileron, you see it goes very quickly. I just want to go back to 20 because that's our correct trim. So that showed you the difference there, how you can speed up the way it works. But personally, I would leave mine on the fine adjustment. Let's go back to the fine adjustment. And let me show you that now operating. You see it's a lot slower. So it would be your preference. And there we go, that's the trim step. Let's go back into our model setup, and now we're going to take a look at the throttle settings. Okay, throttle settings. There we go. The first option we've got we can check is the reverse. Here we can reverse the throttle by checking this option without changing the weight from plus 100 to minus 100 in the mix window. So that would make the problem a lot easier to solve. Probably I would only use this on a simple model. A more complex one I would actually go and change it in the mixes. The source option allows you to change the source of your throttle to a rotary switch on your radio from the gimbal. Maybe useful on a high lift electric glider, possibly, but I'm sure there could be other applications for this. Maybe a long range fixed wing which is using iNav and autonomously flying at cruising speed, so you do not accidentally chop the throttle. Maybe set up a logical switch so you can switch between the gimbal and the rotary switch. Anyway, I digress. I just love OpenTX. The next option we're going to look at is the trim idle only. This option restricts input to only the idle portion of stick throw, unlike the usual offset which affects both ends of the throw. I've never used this option before because I think it is for mainly for helicopters. Now let's move on. Okay, this is an interesting one, display checklists. Now here, if we check this option, this allows model notes on the SD card to be displayed when the model is loaded. Now I'm going to change over to my Beta 75X and you should see a checklist come up. Let's try it. Okay, so we're going to exit. Whoops, I beg your pardon. And select model. And we're going to go to the quads, pick this one, and there we go. There's a checklist that I set up. So if you turn your radio back on again or you change model, then this checklist will appear. It's quite a useful idea, but then to come out of it you just push return. So there we go, that shows you the checklists. Your checklist must be in DOS text format and mustn't have more than 35 characters a line, as far as I understand. So if you put more than 35 characters and it doesn't work, just reduce the number of characters per line. Okay, let's switch back to the radio. Okay, we're going to now move on to our throttle state. Let's go back into the menu and go to throttle state. There we go. Throttle state. This option causes your radio to warn of a throttle not at idle when a model is loaded. Now, as you know, when you turn your radio on, you'll get the warning come up. It is checked as a default setting, as a safety feature. You can remove the throttle warning by unchecking this box, but personally I wouldn't recommend that, nor do the folks at OpenTX. Okay, let's move to our next option, switch positions. Okay, this one is very useful. This allows you to change the switch position order so that when you turn your radio on, you do not get the switch error warnings. If you set up one or more switches in a different position other than forward, you will get the warning. For example, I have my disarmed switch back instead of forward, which is normally the default setting. So I would get a switch warning when I turned my radio on. So this option allows us to be able to change the positions of the switch in the default position so you don't get the error. By selecting this option and holding down your scroll button, you will reassign the switch positions with regard to the radio's boot up. As you can see from mine, switch F is back and not forward. And our next option. Okay, pots and sliders. This function allows pots and slider position warnings when turning on your radio. The options available are off, manual and auto. The default setting is off, which reports no startup warnings and takes no action to save current pot and slider settings when exiting a model or turning off your radio. Auto and manual allow selection of individual pots and sliders to be checked and the necessary warnings given on starting up the radio. The auto option automatically stores the last positions when the radio was turned off or another model is selected, and startup warnings will check against the saved positions. The manual option stores current pot and slider settings only when long pressing the scroll button on the label of each pot before exiting. Only pots and sliders that are highlighted are included in the startup check warning. To toggle on and off the selection of the pot or slider, you have to short press the scroll wheel on the relevant label. Let me show you on the radio what I've just explained verbally. Okay, if we click enter and we say auto. Okay, so now what should happen, wherever I've put the switches, it should remember that position. So I am going to leave everything as is. I'm going to then turn off my radio. Okay, now I'm going to alter these two. So they should come up in the error window when I turn on.
Switch warning.
There we go. So it's showing me the error on these two. So if I center them, that one and that one, and we can push OK, and we'll go past our checklist. And so that shows you how those warnings work. Now for the center beep option, I'm going to change my model to my Taycan.
Disarm motors. Rate profile 1. Turbo mode off.
Okay, I'm going to go down to pots and slides, center beep. Now, with the center beep, this allows you to set up a beep sound when selected controls cross their center position from either direction. This can be set up for switches S1, S2, LS and RS, and for the 4 gimbals. I have no idea why you'd want to set up a beeping sound when your gimbals go to the center, because I think it would drive you up the wall. But let's go back to the radio and I'll show you this function in action. Okay, what we're going to do now is click here, and then let's say we're going to do rudder. We highlight the rudder. Now if I move the rudder and come back, you see what happened, it beeped. I think that would be completely irritating, but there could be a reason, and then you can set those up on the switches that they're showing you there. So we go back, we click, and it will turn that off. Okay, and there we go. That's the center beep explained. Now we move on to global functions. Okay, we come out of here. Global functions, okay, which is checked on. Now this function allows you to enable or disable global functions which are set up in the radio's global functions window under the system menu. So you can turn it off just for an individual model. Our next window is our internal RF settings. This is where we bind our receivers to the transmitter. We can complete a range check which lowers the transmitter power, so we do not have to walk 2 kilometers away from our transmitter. We have the options here to bind on channel, disable telemetry, disable channel map and low power mode. Let's go through the options in more detail. Okay, I think we'll all be aware of how we turn the internal module on and off. That will be done here. I'm not going to change this. I have videos that show you about the fine tuning. I will leave a link in the description below for that. Okay, let's go down to the bind on channel. Bind on channel is a version of auto bind. This is where you can set up a momentary switch and output it to a channel so that you can start your model binding. Now I use this on the Samer quad because if you happen to turn the quadcopter on first and then turn your radio on, it won't bind. And at the beginning I used to have to go into the model setup and tell it to bind again until I realised I could use this feature. I'll then switch back to the radio and show you how this works. Let's have a look at how this quad now binds to my radio. I'm going to, now obviously the radio is already on, so if I turn the little quad on, I'm going to have to lift it up so that you can see the blinking LEDs. and you see it's not binding. It's going to flash fast and then go slow. But if I do this, there we go, it's bound. That's as simple as that, but it makes it a lot easier than having to keep opening up the model setup, going down there and clicking the bind button. So it's quite useful. Let's just check that it is bound. Okay, I can have props on this one because there's only a little plastic quad. Let's turn it on, and there we go. That's working.
Disarm motors.
Okay, that's how you set up bind on a channel. Let me show you how I set it up so that I could bind on channel by selecting this option. Now, the first thing I did was went to the logical switches, which is here, and I set up logical switch 13, which basically says that if the quadcopter is armed, it won't be active. So in other words, you can't accidentally try and bind when the quadcopter's flying. So that's the simple case of and gives you the switch positions of SF and SB. And SB being the switch which is initializing the bind, and the armed. And the armed button. Okay, now if we go back, we have to go into mixes. And there we have to go to channel 16 because that appears to be the default one. And all we have to set up in there is to call it bind and then link it as the source to L13. Then your quadcopter will only bind if it's disarmed. And there we go, there's that function explained. Now I'm going to change over to my Taycan to go through the telemetry because obviously this toy grade copter does not have telemetry. So we are going to change our model. I'm going to go down to the Taycan and select.
Disarm motors. Brake profile 1. Turbo mode off. Reset.
Okay. Now we move down to disable telemetry. If you wish to have receiver redundancy and use 2 receivers on your model, you would only be allowed to send back data to your radio from one of the receivers. So this function allows you to disable the telemetry on one of the receivers. Now our next one is low power mode. Low power mode is a bench mode to save power when you're working on your transmitter when you're connected to the receiver. If you leave your model in low power mode, when you turn the radio back on, it will give you a warning that your radio is set to low power, which obviously wouldn't be very good for flying. Okay, let me demonstrate that. So I'm going to check that option, come out. Now if I close off my model, my transmitter, and then put my T16 back on again,
Welcome to OpenTX.
you should get a warning, hopefully. There you go. So we know to go in, change that setting. So push enter, we're going to go down, and we will change that, uncheck that. Oops, not that one, this one. Okay, failsafe, no pulses. As I'm aware with quadcopters, we all set this up to no pulses. There are other options in there, but I've only used the no pulses one, but let's just have a look. Okay, let's hold that thought. I'm going to go to companion and go through the failsafe modes in more detail. So not set, which is probably not a good idea, but there is an option to not have a failsafe set. Hold. Now hold will hold the current position of your fixed wing aeroplane, whatever, but I think that's a bit dodgy because if your plane happens to be on full throttle and diving, then it's going to carry on like that, like an unguided missile, and possibly hit someone. So probably not a good idea, and definitely not for quadcopters. Custom. Now this is where you can set up a custom failsafe. So that would be, you can put in slight up elevator and maybe slight rudder so that the engine cuts on your fixed wing so that it just carries on circling until it gets the link back up again. No pulses. Now no pulses is what we use on quadcopters because obviously we don't want a thing with 4 blades whizzing around like a maniac going out of control. So it literally turns the motors off and it just drops to the ground. And then we have receiver, which receiver, it's when we have a receiver that has Failsafe built into it, and you set up the Failsafe within the receiver itself. Okay, let's switch back to the radio. Okay, then we move on to the external RF. Now this is where we can connect to a crossfire unit or any other module that we put into the JR bay at the back of the T16. And everything that I showed you about the internal module will be available for the external module. Now there is one thing, depending on the receiver you have, in this section here there can be another option, and that is disable channel map. Now the disabled channel map, this is the way I can explain this function, is in respect of the Spectrum DSM receivers. The RX output will match the Spectrum standard TAER channel mapping independently of the input configuration, whether that be AETR or RETA, etc., unless this feature is selected. So it's not coming up on this particular model, but it is an option that could appear depending on the receiver that you're using. Okay, and oops, too far. And then we go to the trainer mode. In this option, trainer mode, we can use this function to tell our radio if this radio is the master or slave transmitter when setting up a buddy system to train one of our friends to fly RC. In the future, I will be producing a video of how to set this function up. And that completes this window of the model setup windows. Thanks for watching this video, and if you enjoyed it, please give it a thumbs up. And if you really enjoyed it, please subscribe to my channel and please share this video with your friends. And if you have any comments, please leave them in the comment section below. I'd love to hear from you. Thanks for watching. Happy flying, stay safe. Bye for now. Bye.
Disarm motors.